Hi folks, Graham Vincent, Violinmaker and musician. It's a cold January, mid-January. I am just at the stage where I have sort of pegged the roughly shaped fingerboard onto the neck. So the next stage now is to actually sort of mark out the scroll. You will see I've already got the actual sort of scroll there marked out, and that's because I use this template to mark out where to actually cut the whole of this, you know, the whole shape of the blank. So I've already got some of the markings down on there. That's the easiest part, really. The more difficult part really is marking out the widths, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, obviously the actual shape of the scroll sideways on is absolutely fundamental to the way it looks, but for whatever reason I've always found that the easiest part. That may just be a personal thing, or maybe other people find the same thing, I don't know. Anyway, so the next stage is to mark out the actual widths. Now I use, if this looks suspiciously like a bit of beer can, that's because it's a bit of beer can, really. And this is a template that I've made up in the past, and you will, let me take this fingerboard off here. There we go. I think you will start to see how I use that. That basically is laid on there and over the top and round, kept on the center. And that really gives you a fairly accurate starting point. Now, obviously, you have to make one of these in the first instance. And I mean, the way that I did it was I just, when I'd done one I was really happy with, I then laid a piece of paper around it and marked it from there. So you could do the same. You could start with a scroll, or you can actually sort of go through the theory of it all and mark out the widths. That's how I did it. So that's what I'm going to do now. Mark that out. A lot of this is just done by eyeballing, and it's good to get your eye in and practice that, because most of the time these are going to be judged only by people's eyeballs, so you might as well use the same tool. What I tend to do as well, because this template isn't perfect, is I'll mark it out one way around, then flip the template over and mark it again, so I have a sort of an average figure, if you like. If that makes sense. I can see on the front that I have to swing that across. Okay, so that's what I'm doing now. I have actually sort of moved that across slightly. So I'll get you from about there. Oops. It's a bit of a mess. Let's turn it around that way. That's gonna, yeah, there we go. That's gonna make life a bit easier for me. And through there. Right. So as I said, I'm now going to use the same template, just laid on the other way up, and mark exactly the same things. And that'll give me two lines, which hopefully won't be too dissimilar. Again, just eyeballing this. Perhaps I should make a more accurate one. Oops, God, dear. Like I say, this is a starting point, and you should, and you normally do, let the scroll develop with its own character as you go as well. Right, okay. That's, for some reason or other, I think it's because the video is rolling. The marking out has been really messy, but no excuses. It's just me. So I'm just kind of picking the line I'm going to use now. Yeah, it's looking nice. I think I could come across that way, but the other thing I use as well is I do tend to have a 10p piece which I use. This is a bit funny, isn't it? But I've always just used this particular one. Perhaps that suggests I'm not that confident in the accuracy of my template. Okay, so that's good. I mean, basically, we've got the actual size of the fingerboard on there. We've position of the nut. It starts to go parallel, from there, and then this goes from about 24 down to about 20 there. And that's the sort of the first swoop round marked out. I mean, the other one, the next one, we'll do once we've cut this down to that. I'm just going to mark out the other one, but I don't think you'll particularly want to see me do that. So, cutting a scroll. Well, this is one of those things that is, on the face of it, quite complicated. But I would say the actual individual steps are pretty simple. It's easy to do a fairly basic scroll, but there's a massive difference between like a functional scroll that looks scroll-ish and some of those absolutely beautiful scrolls that you see on classic violins. It's about balance and just having lovely sweeping curves and so on. But I mean, the actual basics of how to do it are one and the same. It's just a question of getting your eye used to seeing how curves flow and making something that looks pretty good from all angles. Easy to say, difficult to do. So, we know the outside of the peg box at the front. We know the outside of the peg box at the back. So, what you're going to do first of all is generally what you'll do is you will take off this, and you start by putting a saw cut, normally about there, which you take most of the way down to there, most of the way down to where that line projects through to, and then you get a paring chisel or chisel and you clear that away. Once you've done that, you then put another saw cut in, because this is at that stage gone. Put another saw cut in which goes down to there, and then take that away, and you just work your way around. So let's start by just doing the first two, go from there. I tend to use this little Stanley vise for cutting scrolls because you can just put the neck into it and it means you can you can turn it round to whatever angle you want to make life easier. I did a video on this funny little sort of method I've got of turning these into something useful, so do have a look at that. Because of the nature of this wood that I'm using for this particular violin, which, as I've said before, is a sort of a lime, it's so easy to carve that, I mean, sometimes I would saw this waste away, possibly on the bandsaw, but quite frankly, as it's this lime, there's little to be gained in moving to the machine. I might as well just do it with a sharp chisel. I always like to put the holes, the sort of starting holes, if you like, for the pegs through when the neck is still very much a blank, because it means I can do those on the pillar drill really easily, which makes life easier. So that's the two first cuts done. So let's move on to the next. Again, it's a question of joining up the dots. Go quite close to the actual line. As you can see at this stage, I'm not cutting this down to the line precisely, close to it, but not completely there. Let's cut some of the waste away. This is going to be like carving soap, doing this scroll. Normally you're contending with figured grain and probably a stronger wood. Let's do the next cut. And you've got, on this side you're working down close to the line, on the other side, you know, you've got that nice surface that you've just made, so you don't want to go into that. And then either saw that off or chisel off the waste. I mean, I will go on and do the rest, but I mean, fundamentally that is already the whole story of how you do a basic scroll. That's about as far as you can go with a flat chisel. I mean, a flat chisel is useful as you go on, but the actual, you're going to start to use curved gouges really as well from this point. So now we're going to do the other side in the same way. This gives you a better view of what I'm saying about, you know, being careful of the blade here against this. So let that be a guide as to how far down you can go, and looking at the line on this side as well. Again, just take it down to the line. Obviously, I have to turn it away, so it's kind of, it's not the best angle for you to see what I'm doing, but it's the one that I need to see so I can see what I'm doing. So far I've only showed me sort of taking fairly large cuts. Another sort of slightly different approach that some people take is to make a lot of finer cuts, and it's the same process. It's just a question of joining the dots as before, but this way it means removing the waste is, I suppose, a fraction easier. Anyway, but just for the purpose of illustration, I'll do a little bit like that. I suppose it might be a little bit more controlled in some respects. When you're doing any of these things, one thing you've really got to try hard not to do is to sort of, when you're cutting down, is not to undercut the scroll, because what you want, certainly initially, is for these pieces to look like they go straight through and join up on the other side. So almost like the center button wants to look like a piece of dowel going right the way through. And if you come in and clean it up like this, which is quite tempting sometimes, then it doesn't look like that. You see that on a lot of quite expensive antique violins. It's not necessarily a fault, it's a different style. But if you start with making everything run through, then it gives you the option of doing it the way you want as you go. But that's just my suggestion. So carry on doing the same sort of cutting until you have run out of pencil line. Clean that up and then we'll do some more marking. So here we are so far. We've done everything I've said. We've tried to keep, I don't know if you can see that. So this cuts run, they look like they're on a line running straight through. And all the marking that we'd done previously up to that point has now been used. Okay, so now we need to mark these freshly cut surfaces, and we can basically go around as far as here. Okay, so, and this is where kind of experience kicks in. You basically want to know how far this turn wants to sort of protrude beyond the cheek of the peg box. So mark that on there, connect those lines up. Now on the back of my scrolls, this is almost vertical, that side, so I'll mark that on there, and then I'll repeat that on this side. The way I do this, I sort of rest my finger on there, which gives me a sort of a guide to running the pencil. And I'm just doing this completely by eye, and I suggest that's what you should be doing. Now, for the top section, it almost wants to come back in a little bit. That's not a very nice curve. Back in a little bit and out. One of the joys about using a pencil is that you can rub it out. So don't feel worried about just drawing something to start off with. It's a bit of a bump there that I don't like. I'm going to get rid of that already. It's looking a bit rough at the moment. I'm completely aware of that. And then it starts to flare out again on the front. And that's about as far as you can. You see this, that comes in nicely there, but not so much on that side. So let's get in there and try and do the same. And when you're happy with that, and only then, get the saw out and carry on. I'm not there yet, I think. I know I've got a great big wide piece of pencil there, but it's the inner edge that I'm looking at. Yeah, this isn't very nice here. I'll just bring that out a bit more. That's better. Right, I think that's good enough for the next stage. That's as far around as I can go now before I run out of line again. So now it's just a question of, I'll repeat that on the other side, and then it's a question of cleaning up the waste again. So that's that side kind of ready for cleaning up. I'll just repeat that on the other side, the last little bit. I'll be away. Well, here we are in the southwest of England. This is a slightly unusual site for a trip to work, even if it is sort of mid-January. You find snow doesn't normally stay around here very long. How lovely. So here we go. I've done those last final saw cuts. It's a question of picking your most suitable gouge and then starting to clean up. And you're just using the lines that you've marked out already and connecting up the dots basically at this point. I mean, you want to try and make this reasonably accurate at this point. I mean, you should start to see the shape of your scroll appearing, but then, as with all these things, it's kind of almost a question of having a clear intent in your head in your mind's eye as to what it is you want to achieve. That's a really important starting point, actually knowing what it is you want shape-wise. It's a question of introducing that as you proceed. By that sort of thing, I mean you should be starting to look at this beautiful outside shape coming in and up and round. You should be starting to look at how these two curves work together. Just a silly little thing like, you see where this little area comes to a point here? I like to have almost exactly the same there and there, so that these two, so that open space mimics what's going on here. So those two make sense together. It all ties it in a little bit more. Because this timber is so soft, I'm going to actually bush these out with some large bushings, probably boxwood, possibly ebony. Ebony would be quite nice, so you have a black ring around the... When I say ebony, I've got some old ebony pegs I might use, but we'll see. We'll see. This is slightly more awkward to do than normal, because not only do I have a lamp in the way, which I'm kind of used to, it's one of those things you just have to put up with, but I also have a camera in the way as well. So this is where we need to introduce another important subject here. We know that this has to be considered, that shape. We know that the relationship between those two has to be considered. We know that all of these faces at this point in time want to be perpendicular all the way around and up, but there's another face here which requires some thought, and that is this face and what happens to it as it winds its way around. So and I think most violin makers keep this area quite flat, and then again without making it too concave, then start to tip it in a little bit as it gets to there. By this point it wants to be cutting in at quite an angle. So if that's level, it wants to be kind of going in like that, and that probably is maintained pretty much around to about there, and then it gets steeper and steeper until, and you'll see this when I'm cleaning up at the top later on, until this is cut in. So this last little bit here is really quite steep in. So basically that comes around. I'm going to use a piece of card to illustrate the sort of angle I'm talking about. So that there would be flat and level, and then by about here it's starting to tip a little bit more, and it's starting to be slightly concave, and you would maintain that sort of cut going up round, and then it gets steeper until by the time you're at the top there, you're sort of cutting in this this face here, this flat facing the camera, is sort of being cut in like that, and that wants to be done whilst leaving a tiny little... I can't find a pencil, that's annoying. So you leave from here, because this is level, you won't see a flat on the edge. It's only when it gets to about here that you'll start to see this little flat on the outside edge remaining, and that has to be there all the way up. So you're cutting in with this cut like that and leaving a tiny little flat on the edge. That's what I'll be aiming for. This takes so much longer when you have to explain everything. It's really interesting having to put what you kind of have in your head, which you don't really put into words generally. When you actually have to sort of start describing what it is you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to do to someone, sort of it's quite an exercise in its own right. Quite a useful exercise for me, actually. Where are we? I'm playing hunt the appropriate gouge again, aren't I? That's too flat. This is probably too curved. Yeah, too curved. Have I got something in between? Not really. Okay. I think I need to buy myself another gouge. With some operations, it's okay not to clean out the corners as you go. With this now, because every cut on something this small, where the difference between good and bad isn't that great, you want to see the effect of each cut, and therefore I'm making sure that I clean the chippings out completely as I go, so that I can see what I've done. Because I'm taking a little bit of time in explaining what I'm doing, if this is actually going to be a slightly more carefully worked scroll than I would normally do, I would like to think one of the sort of fairly typical characteristics of my scrolls is that they look like they've been worked by someone who is working reasonably quickly. He's looking forward to going down to the bar in the centre of Cremona later in the evening. He's trying to get his work done. I think that's how violin makers used to work, rather than being obsessed craftsmen stuck in their lonely little garrets. I think they were just Italian craftsmen, or whatever nationality, doing their best, working hard, and looking forward to going home and having some food. So a sort of a speed and looseness in what you're doing is, for me, the sort of the ultimate mark that you know what you're doing, because you can get there quickly and easily without having to think about it too much, and without too much working over the same, pretty much the opposite of what I'm doing here at the moment, really. Oh dear. Anyway, I've had to move the camera because I do need to be directly over this to actually do it properly. I don't want to sacrifice the scroll. I mean, if I kept the camera where it was, you would have seen me badly making the scroll in a style, using a method I don't normally use. So this, although it's not quite as good a camera shot for you, at least you can see what I really do now. As always, sharp tools are absolutely critical. With this also, it's nice having a selection of gouges, and obviously you are looking to use the gouge that's fairly close to the, the curve of the gouge matches the curve on the scroll, on the spiral of the scroll, at the point pretty much where you're using it. That's about as far as I will take it now, until I've done both sides, until I've actually sort of put in the scoop running around, until I've done the peg box, and then I will clean it up. But we've got a good basic shape. It's taking me a little bit longer than normal. because I've been mucking around with the camera and what have you. Normally 4 or 5 hours would see me up to this stage from that to this stage on both sides, and then maybe another hour to do the scooping out, and then the peg box, maybe an hour and a half. As I say, there's going to be a little bit of a slight delay on this one because I'm going to bush out these peg holes because this wood is so soft. Right, I'm going to turn off the camera and actually get on with the work now. So next time you see this, which will be in seconds, we'll have moved significantly forward. I would imagine probably I will have a pair of them looking like that on both sides.